So welcome. So as Deb said, I'm the Senior Vice President of the RCVS and I chair the Mind Matters Initiative Committee. I'm a vet, I'm a farm animal vet by background, and from general practice, after 15 years, I moved into industry. So I joined a pharmaceutical company, was with them for 3 years, and then I joined the UK government. I was with them for 10 years. And then I moved into kind of non-veterinary roles as a non-executive director, but always rooted in agriculture. So I always kind of drew on my agricultural vet background and maybe the ultimate returner. So I was elected onto RCVS Council and was president last year. So I would like to, we've got the slide, we've had the slide on of what today's discussion is about. So the Ambition 6, as Debsa says, an attractive career for everybody, including those who have left. So in terms of, we often talk about the 3 R's, we talk about recruitment into the profession, retention within the profession, and returning to the profession. So I think this is really about retention and returners. So I'd like to introduce our panel today. Before I hand over to our guest speaker, if you like. So as the panel, quickly to do a quick introduction, I'll invite Rick to do his short presentation, and then we'll return to the panel for the discussion. So in terms of the panel, please could I invite Rob Williams just to give your name and a brief description, please.
Hi, so my name is Rob Williams. I'm a vet and I work at Vet Partners in the people team, the HR team. So a lot of what this topic is about is stuff that I deal with and try and help with at work every day.
Thank you, Rob. And Claire Vinton.
Hi everyone, pleased to be here. I'm Claire. I am Head of Education at the BSAVA, and some of the issues that we are trying to address through our education programs are around getting people back into the profession. So hopefully I should have some thoughts to share tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. And Jane?
Hi everyone, I have the obligatory veterinary cat. This is Willow. My name's Jane Clark. I'm the Director of Veterinary Services at the Food Standards Agency, and actually first worked with and met Kate when we were both working for the UK government back as veterinary advisors in DEFRA. Looking forward to this evening.
Thank you very much, Jane. And Chris?
Hi everybody, I'm Chris Gush. I'm the Executive Director at RCVS Knowledge. For those of you that might not know RCVS Knowledge, we're a charity that supports the profession to deliver high quality care. One of those domains of quality is the quality of the experience of the care provider.
Thank you, Chris. And last but not least, Hattie.
Hello there, I'm Hattie Lawrence. I'm the Equine Director for CVS Group, but I also lead the EDI group for that business. Thank you. I'm a vet, an equine vet by background.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So hopefully everybody who's listening in tonight will hopefully agree with me. We've got a really, really diverse panel with loads of experience and insight. So I will come back to the panel, but first of all, I'd like to invite Rick Harris, who's founder of Customer Faithful, which is a research consultancy, who some of you might have met during a series of insight sessions we did ahead of the RCVS Workforce Summit in 2021. So I will now hand over to Rick, who will talk us through how the voice of the professions fed into the Workforce Summit and the subsequent action plan. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Kate. Good evening, everybody. Yes, my name is Rick. I'm a researcher in employee experience, patient experience. And yes, I had the privilege of doing some work with a number of your colleagues back at the end of 2021 now, where we ran, as you see on the screen there, a whole series of focus groups and some one-to-one interviews as well, to get people's, as it says there, concerns and suggestions about how it was to be part of the workforce and the experience they had. We had an amazing response, more than we could really cope with. So it was great to have that voice of the profession so enthusiastically. It was, I think it did help that we're an independent consultancy, so they really could say what they think. And we got to all corners of the UK, which was great. Those focus groups delivered hundreds of suggestions. I've got a huge database of all of them still. And that output from the workshops and the interviews was the input for the workshop summit, which is, goodness, well over a year ago now. You can just see that little picture of people busily working away at that summit. It was a broader set of stakeholders, including from government, from education, which was great to extend the ideas and issues that were raised in the focus groups. And it had a very positive slant to it. We used a design thinking approach for the way we ran the Workforce Summit, which really focuses any issue or problem on how might we change things, how might we improve things, which frames it really in a way to move forward. So we did, I think, finesse a number of the ideas that came from the focus groups in that meeting, and indeed raised some new ones and some new issues as well. And that output duly became the input for the next step, which was the building of the action plan that we have today. Again, that took in an even wider set of stakeholders, and to collaborate with them actively, recognizing that there was a whole heap of initiatives and programs that, of course, the college was running already. So there was quite a challenge, not only to take on board what was coming out of the insight work and the summit, but also to integrate it into the many programs that already existed. And that was no mean feat to do that. Going into that summit, there were 6 sort of big themes that emerged. And there they are on the screen, writ large. The challenge then for the action plan was to take those 6 themes and do that integration piece. And the next slide shows how they were kind of merged, sometimes extended into the ambitions that we're working with the action plan. And you can see ambition 6 there down the list, all of the ones before we have run sessions on already. So that was, I think, a key win coming out of the action plan, was to blend these so that they don't stand independently, but they make a cohesive program, as it says there. And that's something I think we certainly have seen being achieved as we've gone through these sessions. They do overlap. So as you'll talk tonight about this attractive career, and you will pick up on some of the other ambitions, and that's not an apology. I think that recognizes the reality of the workplace. One of the slides that we took from the insight work is the next slide. And I'll show you this because it particularly, I think, plays into tonight's ambition. These are some of the issues and the themes that came out of those focus groups. And you can see from this slide how it really does span. You've already mentioned the 3 R's tonight, how it spans those coming into the profession and being educated, coming into practice, onboarding, all the way through to some of the challenges of for example, work-life balance, paying conditions, growing the career. And I don't expect you to read the small print, and don't worry about that, but just to show you that was seen as a whole life cycle approach. In the title there is a good description of it, all the way through to and including those who have left the profession, and including those that have left and don't come back. And I wanted to make this point, that the reason it was seen as a cycle is because if we have got vets and vet nurses who are leaving on good terms, they become advocates for the roles. And that gets fed back into, and indeed some of them teach at the vet schools that are bringing on the next generation. So it really was a cycle where it comes around again. So I thought it'd be worth showing that slide because it really fell out of the research, and it's been followed ever since. But the last slide I always show at these sessions is to put some actual voices, some of the voices we heard in the sessions, on the screen tonight. And I'll pick up 3 of many topics that I could have chosen, but I'm sure you'll get to others. But I wanted to hear the voice on 3 of these themes. One was portfolio.
And do you want to hand with them? Do you want to hand with them?
Oh, we have an extra voice in there. Yeah, portfolio careers is about how people are doing other jobs as well as being a vet. And let's be open and honest about that. And there is a couple of voices. When I first left the sector, I was in survival mode. I had other interests, so I kind of fell into recharge by doing locum work. I didn't want to do full time. It was augmenting other things that I was doing. And that break was actually really helpful. And it's nice to have some positive comments on the screen as well as always presenting it as problems to solve. So there are some good examples of where I think the profession is changing to accommodate people of all different types and how much they can still give to the profession. So that was one theme I just wanted to throw in there. A second one I've called finding ways to keep the flame alive. And that really does represent some of the tough challenges of today's workplace. That top quote, coming back from working in industry, for the locum rates of pay where you don't get insurance, you don't get pension, holidays, sick pay, and so on, you know, that's not necessarily such a great package, and it's tiring. 3 days of that you need to recover, is what they said. So that's, they wanted to work those 3 days, but they recognized that if they went 5 days, it would start to eat away at their energy. And so that was their way to keep the flame alive. And the second one points towards the cost of getting back in through the training, saying, you know, courses are very expensive, and so return to work practice courses maybe are a little bit too short, and I spend a lot of money on retraining to get back in again. And so there's a financial issue there that may be a barrier to helping people return. And then the last point I wanted to throw in, or theme, was about making work accessible. And I know that there's a lot of work going on in the college about this. The first one is perhaps better known: no opportunities for after hours childcare where I live. My partner has unpredictable hours and it's also on call. That sounds like a busy household. So I had to take a career break. They felt kind of there was no other way to do it. Compared to that second quote where they're saying it's hard to stay employed with disabilities in a very demanding workplace, you'll know more about that than me, unless the practice is try harder. And perhaps that phrase is part of what we're going to look at tonight, is looking for ways to be different, to explore in a very determined fashion to make an attractive career for everyone, including those who have left. So I hope those real voices from the profession that we heard in the groups spur you on tonight, and good luck with the session. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Rick. And I think that's really helped sort of set the scene to understand how we've arrived at the 6 ambitions that we've got, and the particular one that we're looking at tonight. So the amount of work that has gone in, and the amount of consultation, discussion through the insight, the focus groups, and then through the stakeholder workshop, and then today. And I think I want to be explicit that this is absolutely about vets and veterinary nurses. I know we've got some vet nurses attending this evening, so this is absolutely extends to, you know, it braces both professions. So it's important to state that up front, I think, as well. And also that this is not just about general practice. I mean, the majority probably will be in general practice because that's the way it's happening, but we will absolutely embrace those are not in general practice, whether that's veterinary nurses or vets, because there are careers for both professions in roles that are non-clinical. And it's quite interesting because we've got quite a few non-clinical people on the panel. So great, I will now turn to the panel, and I will ask each of the panel to give us maybe a few minutes, up to maybe 5 minutes max, on their understanding of the topic and their experiences, so that can kind of allow us to have hopefully a really rich and diverse discussion. So Rob, may I come to you first? That's Rob Williams from Vet Partners.
Thanks, Kate. I suppose I have direct experience of this. Actually, the whole conundrum of particularly return to work. I ran a practice for our CEO. It was her practice, and she left us to set up Vet Partners. And I had the most random experience I've ever had in a consult. So I was examining this Labrador that had a cruciate, and I was talking to the person about cruciates, and when we finished, she said, "Oh, do you have any vet jobs going?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" I knew that this lady was a vet, and I knew she had previously worked in the practice I was working in, but it totally blindsided me. Anyway, it turns out that this client had been a vet and worked in the practice where I was working, and she had taken a decision when her second child was born to stop work. She was in a very fortunate position. Her husband earned a very, very large salary, and she didn't have a financial need to work, and she chose to focus on her family. And when her youngest child started secondary school, she did that thing like, now what do I do? And she kind of had it in her head that she wanted to come back to work. and she pitched. So I said, "Look, that's kind of interesting. Like, what do you have in mind?" And what she wanted to do is work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 9:30 to 2:30. And in my head, my initial reaction was expletive. That is never going to work, because we work from 8 until 7, and it's busy, and we don't really need 9:30 to 2:30. But then I kind of started thinking about it. Well, actually, how cool would that be if we had somebody that worked from 9:30 to 2:30? Because what that would do is it would mean somebody else who is currently doing stuff could do something different. So when we worked out how to bring Ruth back into the practice, and she was like a safety relief valve for a lot of the rest of the team. Her presence did free up small amounts of time for other people to do other things. And if I had gone to everybody 3 or 4 months into Ruth returning to the practice and said, "Oh, you know, Ruth has decided this isn't working and she wants to stop," like half of them would have walked out, because it was transformative for their roles. You know, one person was mad keen on ultrasound, and we were able to craft 4 hours on a Wednesday where they could just do ultrasound stuff. And not have to do consulting or not have to do house calls or whatever would have been happening. She could just have dedicated time to just do ultrasound. So I think one of the things that we can, that sometimes trips us up as a profession is we default to, well, that's not going to fit with the rota, or that's not going to fit with how we work. And that was my initial gut reaction, like, not in a million years. And I kind of thought about it and thought, actually, there's huge value in this. So I think maybe one of the things that we need to do as a profession is to not default say no to things, to think, well, how could that work, or how could we make that work? Because currently it feels like there's a huge amount of lost human capital and experience and expertise, because we don't think, well, what are the possibilities? So I think if any employers are on the thing, on the call or on the Zoom, and they're kind of thinking, I'm not sure how I would make this work, or it might be fair for the rest. The way you should think about it is, how can I make this work? Not no is the answer. I think that should be the starting point. We default to no too readily sometimes, and we put all of these, I suppose, slightly immature, perfectly understandable, but they're actually quite immature reasons, like it won't be fair to the rest of the team. Well, the rest of the team are likely to need this at some point. So if we can make it work for this person, we will be able to make it work for everybody. And actually, that is where the fairness comes. So I think there's lots of too simplistic thinking about, this is a really complicated thing to get right, and a complex thing. So it requires new ways of thinking. And we should be brave enough to do that.
Yeah, I think that's some very good points in there, Rob. I think, yes, it's about thinking laterally and differently, and you know, changing, not just keeping on doing what we've always done, because there are I think and flexibility, I think, is the key. And you've raised an interesting point about the flexibility for the employer as well as the employee. I think
yeah, like the flexibility thing, that is a two-way thing. Where it goes wrong for people making a request is they forget that there's got to be reciprocity. There has to be a give and take on both sides. You can't just turn up to an employer with a list of 27 demands and assume they're going to say yes. And if they don't, then they're somehow evil. It's like, no, you can probably have 1 or 2 things that are like red lines for you, and you're going to have to assume that they're also going to have 1 or 2 things that are super important to them. So that's a really key thing.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Robin. And really, just to encourage everybody again, if you'd like to use the chat, it's open, so please do put into the chat. But I think Rob's raised some really interesting points there that we can delve into later. So thank you, Rob. And now if I can turn to Chris Gush, please.
Thanks, Kate. So those that didn't catch the introduction earlier, I'm Chris Gush. I run RCVS Knowledge. It's a charity that supports the profession to deliver high quality care, and we do that through a number of ways, but really we do it through focusing on 7 domains of what we consider high quality care. So that's care that's safe, effective, patient client centered, timely, efficient, and equitable. But within that, there is a real need for that care to be delivered by caregivers that are having a quality experience themselves, and that is to support those that are delivering it, but also those that are coming back into the profession a high level of enjoyment in work. And there are a number of areas that we try and support the profession in doing that. One is around our initiatives around quality improvement. So the drive and the busyness of the profession at the moment, the demands from clients, the resourcing issues, the recruitment issues mean that asking people to do more is very difficult and not really appropriate at the moment. Asking them to work harder is almost impossible. So you have to start to think of how can we look at doing things differently? But how can we do things differently in a way which is still safe, effective, and efficient for us as an organisation? And you can do that by layering in design tools that are used within other safety critical industries, such as the human healthcare, airline industries, and also in kind of shipping and the nuclear industry, around systems. So they generally are not bad people. They're generally very stressed and overworked people, but they're quite often our systems in place that really prevent people from doing the best job possible. And so these quality improvement tools allow people to better understand what their outcomes are, what they're doing, what the outcomes are for the animal, what their processes are, and places within that process you can potentially drive some efficiency, drive some space, as Rob was saying, for others to do things that are, give them a bit of breathing room, but also give them room to really focus on areas of their career that bring them enjoyment and bring them joy. So that I can put in the chat lots of tools and resources that we've got as an organisation to support people do that. But really, it's a focus on you spend an awful lot of time at work. Veterinary profession is a vocation to many people, and that vocation brings them joy, but you need to make sure that that's a continued thing in what they're doing. And there's another big piece of work that we've been doing with a number of people in the profession around what brings you joy in work, or rather what matters to you conversation. So this is the guide and a resource that we published, and again I'll put some links on it to really support people to understand what matters to you as in your daily work. What helps you make a good day. When you've had a good day, what are the elements of that good day that you take away and you say, actually, these are the things that really made it? And then how can we as a profession enable them to happen easier? What is getting in the way of that being a good day every day? Some things are well within our control, some things are completely out of our control. And so the aim is just not to hear, but it's to kind of understand, reflect on the answers, and have what they call kind of active listening. So what is the purpose of the conversation we're having? Then we try and, as I said, find out, support people and identify what gets in the way, what the pebble in the shoe, how can we improve the process, not individuals, but, really get into the nitty gritty of the detail there. And then try and support teams to find ways for the whole team to work better together, to create more good days and increase their joy in work. And I think these systems, when you start to add the different approach, as Rob said, actually looking at differently and saying, could we use somebody for a certain amount of time in the morning? Would that fit into somebody returning to work? Or could we fit someone in at the end of the day? That may well suit. And then how do we change our process to allow us to do that in a safe and efficient way? And acknowledging that some things are within our control, other things may be larger and structural challenges, and they need raising and address. But actually, you need to build on those 3 steps that I outlined there, so that you can test and really see about these improvement and processes within the organisation. So I do think that the challenge of burnout, of returning to work, and of the structures not quite fitting are a real challenge. I do think we also need to remember there are structures. They're the profession design structures, and if they're not working, then a different approach may well be needed.
Thank you very much, Chris. And some really interesting points in there as well for both the perspective of the employee, but also for the perspective of the employer and the providers of work. So yeah, again, good food for thought from you, Chris. And again, please use the chat, anyone listening in or watching. And also, even if you're not wanting to put a question in the chat, keep your eye on the chat, because there's lots of really good resources that are being put in there with links to many different resources. So thank you, Chris. May I now come to Hattie, please?
Thank you, Kate. So very interesting to listen to both Rob and Chris, and I recognise all of what they have discussed. I agree completely with Rob that the absolute key to successful return, and in my opinion also recruitment and retention, is flexible working. And that's certainly been our key focus around trying to deliver flexible working that really works, rather than just talking about flexible working as a great concept and then not actually quite delivering it on the ground. And again, absolutely echoing what Rob was saying, the way to do that is I believe, to start with a presumption of yes. So historically, the legal position for employers has tended to be that one has to consider a flexible working request, but you have no obligation to actually acquiesce to it, to grant it even partially. Whereas we've tried to completely turn that on its head and start from a point of our starting point will be yes. There may be some adjustments that are necessary in order to, as Rob says, make it fair for the team and also make it functionally effective for the business. But nonetheless, we will find some way to give you a degree of flexibility, even if it's not absolutely everything that you want. And I think as that starts to become more standard across the profession, then hopefully we can normalise that conversation and it can become our standard way of working. And as a profession, unfortunately, we have a tendency to be slightly rooted in the past, and we do a lot of talking about this is how we've always done things. And this is a really good example of a situation where we just can't continue on that basis. So that would be my first point, really, that flexible working is absolutely key, and you can't really have a sensible conversation about returning or returners until you've got that embedded in your practice or your organization. And then I think mentoring is key also. I think we have to acknowledge that whilst we've got returners would often be highly experienced, highly expert, people often with a great deal of life experience, and looking at the questions, there are people who've submitted interesting questions who have vast amounts of really important expertise and experience. Nonetheless, it must be daunting to come back into that environment, particularly if you've been away from it for a long time. And actually, I suspect that the clinical skills are the least important thing. They're the least of the problem, because I suspect most experienced clinicians maintain that fundamental clinical understanding. It's going to be about providing confidence about integrating into the practice team and confidence in one's role in that team. And tied in closely to the flexible working is the idea that both the returner and the rest of the team recognise that that individual is an asset and not a burden. And if you're trying to change the culture around flexible working, perhaps that practice hasn't historically had a lot of part-time workers, for example, then there can be a sort of sense that somehow there's a lack of fairness. But of course, what this can do is it can open up a whole conversation around more flexibility across the whole team, as brilliantly demonstrated by the example that Rob gave. So I think we have to see it in those terms, that this is a really positive opportunity for the individual, the practice team, and also the employer. I think mentoring is part of that. And as I say, we certainly quite focused on having a mental structure, a mental network that helps to support those individuals. And one of the things I think we maybe increasingly have to recognise is that because of the retention crisis we've had in the last 5 to 10 years, we've probably actually got quite a number of relatively young vets who left after a shorter period of time in practice. So it feels to me like there's maybe 3 cohorts, and of course there are lots of individuals who don't fit into this, but there are perhaps 3 cohorts we need to consider. There is the classic woman who is returning to work after having her children, and it's going to be really unhelpful to only focus on that group. They're a key group, they're an important group, but nonetheless there are plenty of others who are going to want to come back into the profession. There's a cohort of young vets who we know left 5 to 8 years post-qualification, and we haven't really quite figured out how to retain them, and that's another project. But I think we have to recognise that if a young vet left 5 years post-qualification, they probably don't have those deeply embedded clinical skills and experience that an old person like me who did, had over 20 years in practice before stepping away from clinical work. And so they might need a little bit more clinical support. And then we've got this whole other cohort that I'm really excited about, which is the people who sort of thought they might like to retire early and have now decided maybe they're a bit bored and they might like to get back into clinical work. And I'm really enthusiastic about trying to engage with them. In order to, because wouldn't it be amazing, just like the lady in Rob's example, to get lots and lots of those really experienced clinicians back in to help support and mentor those young vets who are 3 to 5 years post-graduation and who are a little bit lost and, would benefit so enormously from that expertise and experience. So that's my experience of it all. And if we can start to turn this around, I think it will be transformative for us as a profession.
Wonderful, Hattie. That's really, really helpful and thought-provoking. So thank you. We'll come back to you on a number of those, I'm sure. So next we have Claire, please.
Hi, it's been really great listening so far to everyone's thoughts, and a lot of them resonate a lot with me. A bit about my background. I think I come at this from quite a personal level as well as a professional from my role, because I was one of those vets that left the profession. Well, didn't leave the profession, but left clinical practice after a couple of years, moved on to do a PhD and then lecturing, and then started in my current role 6 or so months ago. And I'm also a mother who has just returned after a maternity leave break and who is almost going through, I guess, the transition of coming back to work after this life-changing experience that I've been through. And so I guess I've got that personal connection to what we're talking about today. And then also from the BSAVA standpoint, we are looking at how we can support people that are wanting to return to work, and what we need to be able to deliver for them to make that transition easier for them. And I just wanted to pick out, I guess, really just a couple of points that have been made already, and to signal my agreement with them, I guess. I think really for me, one of the key issues that is no longer kind of the elephant in the room that we are talking about now is the culture within the veterinary industry. And I think there is a long tradition of seeing veterinary professionals as vets before we see them as humans, and putting the career and the demands of the job before sometimes things like our work-life balance, and maybe even kind of down to our happiness at times. And I think we need to take a step back and realize that everyone that we're working with are humans, and that everyone is coming at this from a humanistic point of view. And I think it was possibly Hattie or one of the speakers just now was saying that people in general, they're not trying to get one up on you as an employer, or they're not trying to kind of get one up on you as being, I get to work part-time and you guys don't. People, that's not generally the position that I think people are coming at this problem from when they are looking for things like flexible working, and they are looking for more support. They're doing it because they need it to be able to stay in the profession, and because they need it to be able to live a happy and fulfilling life and a happy and fulfilling career. And so I think that's really great that we're really talking about prioritizing saying yes and trying to work it out the best that we can, rather than that default absolutely that Rob has said that is, I mean, it still is for a lot of things. My default, the first thing is no, because it's a moment of panic about how do I cope with this, but then catching ourselves in that snap response and stepping back from it and really thinking. And so I think what we need to do is to look at the culture a little bit and think about something actually that Rick, I think it was, said when he was doing the opening bit, was talking about portfolio careers and the fact that some people have different portfolio careers, and they're not just a vet in clinical practice. And he said we should be open and honest about it. And it brought up in me a sense of shame, and I guess actually a sense of shame that I have maybe felt myself as someone that moved out of clinical practice, that if you're not a vet in clinical practice, then you're not a vet, and you're not kind of contributing to the profession. And I actually would say, actually, I don't think there is any shame in having a portfolio career or spending some time in clinical practice and some of your time doing something else. Actually, it might be a really sensible way to try and meet your needs, that in terms of your work-life balance and your fulfillment, but also exploring different avenues, doing something, for instance, more creative on the side, something else that will stimulate you. And so I really think that portfolio careers are something that we should look at and try and encourage, because if we can get people into a working pattern where they're satisfied, even if that isn't 100% in veterinary practice, then they're more likely to stay in doing the part-time work that they are doing with veterinary practices, rather than leave the profession completely and give up. And I found, again, being really open and honest about my own journey, while I was doing my PhD, I worked part-time in practice, and I was so much happier working part-time in practice and part-time doing research than I was when I was full-time in practice. And it was just that combination really worked for me. And I went from thinking I made a mistake, I shouldn't have been a vet, to thinking, actually, I really enjoy being a vet 2 or 3 days a week and doing something else the other days a week. So I think that's something that we should talk about more, and that we should encourage people to look at, and we should not see it as being a bad thing to not be full-time in practice. And there is a role for associations like the BSAVA and our equivalents in the different species to encourage people to explore that, and to provide them with the resources and the skills that they need to be able to explore those avenues and think about themselves and their fulfillment as a person as a whole. And I think also for me, it feels quite embedded in this idea of kind of equality and diversity that we're trying to encourage so much within the whole world, not just the veterinary practice, but especially as a mother that has returned to work recently myself. It's really hard to go back to work and leave your little baby at a nursery or whatever you're going to do, and there are equally fathers in exactly the same position that will have to do the same thing. And so I think really thinking about how we can support people going through these different life stages. I'm talking about that one because it's the ones I've experienced, but there are similar experiences of other life stages. How can we support people going through this and help them make the best of their situation and get the best out of their career when they feel like that their career is what they want to pursue.
Lovely, thanks very much, Claire. I mean, that's really good hearing thank you for sharing your own experiences as well. I think that's really powerful. And yeah, I'll probably just pick up on a few points before I'll hand over to Jane. So yeah, so I have a portfolio career. I've actually got 4 different roles. One of them I need to be a vet, the others I don't, but actually they all intersect in some way or another, and I think I perform better at each of them because I've got the 4 of them, and they all kind of feed into one another in one way or another. And take your point about you're not a vet if you're not in general practice. Every time people say to me, oh, that means you're not a vet, then I absolutely challenge them every single time. I am a vet, and it doesn't matter that I'm not in practice, I'm still a vet. And your last point, well, that I want to comment on is being a happy vet. I think that is so good, and I'm sure Rob, I think it was, touched on that. You're far, far better to have a part-time happy vet or a different hours. Maybe part-time is not the right word either, because that's got associations linked with it. But a different hours person that's really happy to come in, not just for that individual, but the knock-on effects to everybody else in their team. If they come in energized and happy, that really lifts the whole team. So I think that's a really, really valuable point that you raised. So thank you for that, Claire. Now we'll just, Jane, would you like to come in, please?
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate, and thanks to all the other speakers. It's been absolutely brilliant hearing your different perspectives, and I think you've teed up the balls for me to hit, because I've been writing some things down before we started, and I've got tick, tick, tick. The first one is I'm a vet and I work for the government. I work for the civil service. It's exactly the point that Kate was making. You said, oh, you're not a proper vet if you're not in clinical practice. No, I am. I use my veterinary skills all the time, and I value them hugely. And then also I have a linear portfolio career as well. Portfolio careers don't have to just be about having multiple jobs at one time or multiple roles at one time. They can be about how you transition and pivot between different career pathways. So my big pivot point, and it may have been similar for Kate as well, was foot-and-mouth disease in 2001. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my veterinary career. I was one of the people who might have left after 5 to 8 years because I wasn't enjoying clinical practice, and I didn't find the joy in that, the joy in my work. And when I worked as a temporary veterinary inspector during foot-and-mouth disease, it was tough. It's a really hard job, but it's a really important job. And that changed my and a lot of other vets' views of working in government. The vet from the ministry became demystified for me, and I could see the difference, and this comes back to the joy in your work, the difference that you could make at a farm level, at a national level, and even for me at an international level. One of my favorite little stories is when I was representing, well, I was supporting the chief veterinary officer at the World Animal Health Organization General Session, and the chief veterinary officer had gone somewhere, and I had to speak on behalf of all of the EU. At the time we were still an EU member state, and that was about protecting broiler breeder animal welfare in all 178 member countries of the OIE, WOA as it's now called. And that's the sort of thing that I just feel so passionate about when I talk about my career as a very small but important part of the veterinary profession. We are the diversifiers, I guess, in the whole vet stay go diversify paradigm. And I do want to just also touch on what people said about what we can learn from the work-life balance that people who want to have different working patterns bring us. I feel that sometimes we hear quite a lot about, oh, you know, vets these days, young vets, they just don't want to work, you know, it wasn't like that in my day. But actually, that's such a defensive position. And what we can do is actually learn from that. If we're employers, if we are actually looking at our own careers, it's like, what actually is it that brings me joy? What is it that makes me a better vet and a happy vet? And that's something that I'm really passionate about as well. I do want to talk very briefly about one of the things that is about attracting and signposting careers that are in the areas that people don't traditionally think about. Most, probably 90% of the vets who are registered are working primarily in clinical practice, but there are amazing and varied careers out there, and we want to signal them. We want to talk more about, what you can do working for government, working in industry, working in education. And I think that's something that this sort of event is really helpful for. So, for example, in the Food Standards Agency, which I can obviously speak about, we're looking at how we can both attract people to careers in veterinary public health, for example, through enhancing and funding even extramural studies for undergraduates. But maybe returners would like to do the equivalent of extramural studies to find out what a job like this might be. So I think that's something we could look at. And also looking at maybe developing a government veterinary scheme graduate programme, aligning with that GDP and giving opportunities to work, whether it's in the FSA, whether it's in DEFRA, whether it's in APHA, and to really get a good founding for a career in the state veterinary medicine, veterinary public health, the One Health space that we all work in. So I think all of those things are available. And they can also bring some of that flexibility that people are looking at. I know there was a question in the background briefing going, are there any jobs that you can do from home? Well, I can tell you that I can do my job from home most of the time. We in the Food Standards Agency have something called Our Ways of Working, and we have home-based contracts, and that's what I have. Here I am in Cardiff. You've just seen Willow. She has left in disgust because she is a cat, and as a feline supervisor she chooses her own hours, but that means that I can be at home. I have a very short commute and a very good potential for a work-life balance when I'm not working really late because we're having one of these great seminars. Kate, I am really conscious that we've got to tend to and I could talk for hours more, but I am going to stop because I think that we want to have a bit of time for questions. So thank you very much.
That's brilliant, Jane. Thank you for your perspective, which is very interesting. So I think just picking up on your last point, just maybe I'll ask the panelists. So in terms of pathways back into the profession, which you spoke about, and the FSA has got a program to help support people back in. Hattie, you mentioned something at CVS. So and in terms of being flexible and the mentoring, but I just wondered if there's actually sort of formal programs in any of the businesses that we've got represented here, or I mean, I know from the Royal Colleges of Veterinary Surgeons perspective, we launched the Vet GDP Veterinary Graduate Development Programme about 18 months ago, and we want to use that for returners. So really to help them, give them that confidence and give them that support to return back into practice or whatever area that they want to return back into. And the link for the Vet GDP will be going in the chat as well, if you want to have a look at that. So does anyone have any specific programs, returner programs or support mechanisms, channels to get back into practice? Just we can maybe highlight to the audience pathways back in.
So we don't have a formal returnship program yet that we've sort of wrapped up and tied with a bow, but we have now got what I believe are all the constituent parts of that up and running. So that has been around flexible working, a mentor network, clinical training that's either online or in person, and we have this online thing called Knowledge Hub, which basically has access to all of that clinical training. So we have all of the constituent parts. We haven't quite tied it all together yet, but we've certainly got everything that a returner would need, be they one of the younger cohort that really has had a bit of a crisis of confidence in their career, be that a very senior experienced vet coming back in, or be that someone in the midpoint who has either had a career break for caring responsibilities, or to do a PhD, or work in industry, or any of those things. And we've had a number of individuals in each of those groups that have returned successfully into clinical practice. And also I would add, we have a lot of people working within the business in hybrid roles. So when I was first doing an operations role, I was still working 2 days a week in clinical practice. So I sort of eased myself out of clinical practice gradually over a sort of 3-year period. And we've got lots of people across the business doing that.
Thank you. And actually, just to pick up on your point earlier of the 3 different cohorts of returners, I think that was a really, just to segment them, because they do have different sort of needs, if you like, and it's really important that we match those and not do a sort of one size fits all, because it doesn't. And I'm just thinking about the early retiree cohort. They potentially could become vet GDP advisors. Recently out of practice. Would they be interested in being a mentor for, say, locums? So they're not within a practice, but they might potentially be and giving back to the profession and still being part, because I think it's being needed as well, isn't it? Feeling you're giving within the profession, but feeling needed as well, I think is important.
It's back to that idea that I touched on, and it's linked to the flexible working piece and getting away from the idea that the part-time worker is somehow less part of the team. These people are, as Rob described, an incredible resource that the rest of the team really, really values. And we have to get them to recognise in themselves that they are an asset, not a burden.
Thank you. Rob, anything from you regarding formal or informal?
I don't like the idea of formal.
Or informal.
And the reason is really simple. And I think one of you just mentioned it. It's got to be tailored to the individual, and that's got to be your starting point. So it's a bit like if you talk to a room full of final year vet students, like, what's the most important thing? The most important thing is that the practice you go and join, have it within them to support you in the way that you need to be supported. That's the most important thing. And then if you need some formal tuition in, I don't know, how to work out the rationale of diagnostics, then that's dead easy to give you or find for you or purchase for you. But if we don't get the support in place and recognize, as Claire was saying, I love it when other people say what's in my head. You're a human first, and that's the bit that we need to support. The vet stuff, we'll come back to in no time at all. We went and spoke to an awful lot of people that came back that were returners, and one of the things that they said that were important, the veterinary knowledge, that kind of muscle, if you like, did come back much faster than any of them appreciated. We spoke to loads of them, much faster than they appreciated it would do. They weren't anywhere near stressed when they came back, because they had all of this life experience doing whatever it is they were doing in the time they weren't a vet, which I suppose probably matured them a bit and gave them a different perspective, that like it's not all, like the whole world does not revolve around me being a vet. There's so much more to it. But that's actually a benefit, because it's not as stressful, or they don't get as stressed when they return. But it's very individual. Some people, within 2 or 3 weeks, they're back up to it was like nothing happened. Other people, it takes ages, and they need very, very specific help. And I think where it sometimes goes wrong is something has happened in the practice, and there's a gap in the rota, if you like, and the gap needs to be filled. And this person manifests who has this experience. Oh God, they'd be brilliant. They've got all this experience. And what people often forget is that person who's going to come and join is not going to fill the gap that is now in your rota of that other person who's left. So if you have a 12-year qualified vet who's completely bomb-proof and they've left for whatever reason, and you find somebody who's maybe had a 2 or 3 year or 10-year gap out of practice, and you think they'd be brilliant, you can't assume that you can just plug that person straight into the gap that's been left and that they'll run and be perfect. They won't. You're going to have to craft the role to suit their capability on day one, and it will change over time. But if you think they're going to just come in and plug in and play, like, you're away with the birds. And that's sometimes where it goes wrong. People have an expectation that's unrealistic.
Which goes back to your previous point about employers have to be flexible as well.
Yeah, and it needs to be individualized. So
Yeah,
it needs a huge amount of discussion to work out, okay, what would actually work for you and what help do you need? And how can we together make this work, rather than I'm paying you, turn up and do the job I'm paying you to do, or else you can leave. Like that's never going to achieve anything other than mayhem and badness.
Yeah, and I think so. Sorry, maybe when I said the word formal, I don't mean to say, you know, is one way and that's it.
Oh no, no.
It's like a toolbox, isn't it?
Yes. Totally.
So you
Toolbox is the way.
which works for you. Yeah.
Toolbox is the way to think of it. Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. And Claire, did you have any points on pathways for returns?
Yes, so that is something that we're currently working on, obviously within the small animal sector at the moment, is developing a return, we're calling it a return to work course at the moment, but I think it's become clear to us that it needs to be more than a online lecture series or something along those lines. There's a lot more to the returning to work process that is around confidence and some of the other non-clinical skills that are really important. So we are trying to develop that course so that hopefully in the near future that will be available, and that will help to encourage some people back into the world of work.
Thank you. And is that available on the, maybe it's not available on BSAVA website yet, is it? Or are you... No,
it's not available at the moment. We're currently in the development process and consultation process. So we will soon be doing some research on throughout the veterinary and small animal profession to try and determine some of the key factors as well that want to be incorporated into that. So lovely. Take part in that if you see it coming up.
Keep notes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And Chris, anything on pathways back in from you?
I think from our point of view, we were more looking at not attracting those that may not be, that have left for reasons that they found the work unsustainable, they found the work difficult, and they found the work and they're heading towards burnout. And so the processes and the support that we're providing is to try and enable those that are working in practice to identify what those key pressure points are and see how they can address them. Because I think there's one great thing of getting people back into the workforce, but if you're putting them back into the conditions that made some of them leave, then it's a self-fulfilling cycle that's going to cost both personal time, effort, stress, and mental anguish, I think. So we have to look at kind of both sides, I think, which is where our bit is really trying to support the profession on that. The kind of, as I said, that quality of experience of working within the organisation, which is really important.
Great, thank you. I mean, I appreciate we're just the back of 8. So I think one final question to each of the panelists, and I'm thinking about barriers to people returning, whether they're perceived or real. So just in terms of your experience, your conversations with people, have there been any barriers which people have, any things that people have perceived as a barrier but weren't actually in reality? And Jane, could I come to you first?
Yeah, I think moving into a government role, barrier is very much that, number one, I've not done it before. I'm just a vet from general practice. There's no such thing, of course. We're all amazing veterinary professionals with experiences to bring. And one of the things that we do sometimes need to do is to talk through actually the experiences that you bring can be translated into the government application process, which can be quite intimidating, the behaviours and so on. And actually, we have all those amazing transferable skills.
Thank you, Jane. Who'd like to go next? Hattie?
Yes, I think at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think it's about flexible working. I really do. You know, I think that the biggest practical challenge is, certainly for people coming into our practices, is about making it work in their life and believing that we as the employer or the practice is able to accommodate what they need. And it ties in with so many of the sort of flexible working conversations that we have. You know, anyone involved in employing people would have on a regular basis. You know, people come to you and and try to, even people who are already working for you come and offer a resignation or say they need to leave. And actually, when you get and have a conversation with them, you realize they just need some sort of flexibility in the way that you offer them the opportunity to work. And so the better we get at that, and the better we publicize our willingness to start with yes, then the easier it will be to break down those barriers.
Thanks, Hattie. I'm just picking up a question in the chat about age. So that's potentially a perceived, or is it a perceived barrier to return, would you say?
Not for me. I think it can be a great advantage. As I said, you know, we've got all of these young vets who desperately want mentoring and support and coaching, and young nurses, actually, you know, student nurses who need clinical coaching and support. The more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned.
Perfect. And Rob, did you want to come in on the perceived barriers?
Just the age thing. So my colleague Ruth that came back had been out for 14 years, and she'd done, I think, 15 or 20 years before she, like, so no. And we have another colleague that we interviewed to try and understand this dynamic of coming back. And she had been a primary school teacher for 12 years in the gap where she'd been away from practice, and she's in her mid-50s now. So not at all. We actually, there's a student at one of the vet schools who we got chatting to, who retired from a very long career in finance in the city in London and decided she wanted to do something for herself, which was to go to vet school. And she's going to qualify in her early 60s, and we were very enthusiastic about the idea that we might be able to employ her, because think of all that experience.
Skills, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't age definitely shouldn't be a barrier. It's more like, it's like anything. It's the quality of your character and who you are is probably more important than any descriptor you could attach, age or race or, you know, anything. Like, that stuff doesn't matter. So yeah, that shouldn't be a barrier.
So I think we're busting that myth of ageism completely. Claire, anything from you regarding perceived or real barriers?
Yeah, I think for me, some of the biggest perceived barriers are our own self-worth and our own self-confidence and our self-assurance, as has been said by other panel members, that we are a valuable asset to a business, and that we do have things to offer, whether that's because you're an older age and you're returning after a long career break, or if that's because you're a new graduate and you don't feel like you have enough experience. Actually equipping people and getting past that barrier of, and I'll tie in again here, I'll talk about I'm not just a GP pet vet, or I could do a portfolio career, but getting past that perceived barrier of knowing your self-worth and knowing that you have something to offer, even if it's just on a part-time basis, or even if it needs to be on a flexible basis, you still have something very valuable to offer. And that's something that's in the head, and that's definitely something that we can help people to overcome.
Thank you. And finally, Chris, anything on barriers, real or perceived?
I think that there's quite often a fear of asking, a fear of rejection. If you're coming back and you know you have an idea in your head of the sort of work you want to be doing, and there's a fear of asking it and then being told no, you're not. We don't need you anymore. We don't. Your way of working doesn't fit the profession, and that I don't think is right. I think the profession is open to having those conversations. And you know, I know from working in RCVS Knowledge, we quite often, we have a lot of organizations have issues where somebody to come in and do some work on a less than full-time basis is ideal. You know, you don't necessarily need somebody full-time to do that piece of work, but it is really difficult to get that piece of work, you know, sorted. And I think quite often you are the solution to an issue, you just don't know it. So ask the questions and be receptive to different answers, I think, and maybe your career will take a slightly different turn than the one that you had intended to, but it can be equally as valuable.
Great. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for sharing, as you have done, this evening. I think I'll just do a quick summary and then just maybe one closing remark from each of you. And then we'll need to wrap up the session. But thank you so much. I think that's been really, really useful. And hopefully to all of the people watching as well, it's been really, really helpful. It maybe hasn't provided all the solutions, but if it can get people thinking and actually understanding that maybe there aren't the barriers there that they had perceived. And if we can provide, we'll provide links so that people can go and do their own research. But I think for me, what's come across really strongly is it's about being flexible. So the employers need to be flexible, need to have a sort of bit of a shift of mindset, thinking, well, and I love the default to saying yes, and then working out how we can work it out and work for the individual as well as for the business or the practice. I think that's really key for employers, but then also for those looking for jobs. I think it's one, asking the question, having the self-confidence and asking the question, like Rob started off with, this person just actually proposing, oh, have you got a job for me? Because unless you ask the question, people don't know that you're looking. But I think behind that question needs to have some thought as to what exactly you're looking for. Is it just 1 day a week, or is it, or no, it's not just 1 day. Is it 1 day a week, or is it 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? Have a relatively clear idea of what you're looking for or what your expectations are. But along with that, be realistic and be ready to compromise and accommodate, because it's a two-way street. And I think then, but it does seem to, as so many things do, it's down to communication, and it's about having that conversation to see what works for both parties. I think that's really, really key. And absolutely flexibility, doing things differently. Systems that Chris spoke about, there are systems, there's QI tools that are out there that you can access, because I love the thing about having joy in your job, continued joy, and think about what matters to you. So, and I did that when I left practice. I really took time to think about what actually makes me happy and what matters to me. And it's difficult to do that if you're really stretched at work. So if you can, just take some time out and really reflect, because if you reflect, then it doesn't stop. Then that hopefully will stop you just jumping back into another job and just having the same issues again somewhere else. So I think they're the main things I wanted to pick out. And just to say, there's loads of resources, as has been mentioned by all of our panelists. Resources, there's support for people moving and returning, whether that's mentoring, whether there's online courses coming on, whether it's support, clinical skills. And actually it's quite interesting, a few of our panelists have said clinical skills are probably the least of the worry when you're talking about returners going back into practice. It's the confidence, and it's just having that taking initiative to actually commit to taking a step back in, because there will be support. If you have that conversation and you've said what support you need, then that will be set up for you. So can I quickly go around all of the panelists for a quick closing comment? Jane.
I'm going to be very not erudite and quote a song by Baz Luhrmann, Sunscreen. I've done this before. Don't feel guilty if you don't know what you want to do with your life. The most interesting people I know didn't know at 22 what they wanted to do with their lives. Some of the most interesting 40-year-olds I know still don't. You can have a portfolio career, and it doesn't have to be planned.
Thank you, Jane. And Rob?
You can totally do it. Just like Kate was just saying, just ask the question. It is totally possible, and you'll enjoy doing it, so do it.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. And Chris?
I'd say don't underestimate the value of the experience you gained when you weren't working in the veterinary industry, because it's immense and valuable to bring that other aspect back to the job that others might not have. So think of yourself as an asset to the industry, rather than something that you have to give to.
Lovely. Thank you, Chris. And Claire?
I would say just try and have a human conversation, two humans talking to each other about what they need. I think a transformative moment for me was when I stopped going into conversations assuming that someone was trying to get one up on me or come off better from it, and actually just to think from their perspective why they wanted to have this conversation. So be a bit more open-minded and a bit more empathetic with whoever you're talking to at any point.
Thank you, Claire. And Hattie.
Yes, really just to reiterate what everyone has said and say that, you know, to those that are here or even friends of yours, the profession needs you, and so please come back.
Well said, everybody. Thank you so much for your time and your passion for the profession. And as I said at the beginning, this is as applicable to veterinary nurses as vets. So please do feel included. The resources are open to all, whether you're thinking about returning to practice or returning to another part of the profession. Everything is equally valid and you will be welcomed. So thank you. I think I will now hand back over to Deb.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you to the panel for tonight. We've now come to the end of the session. We will follow up with a summary of the session and the recording from tonight, which will be made available on the website. We'll also be sending out a short survey and would be grateful for your feedback. We have one more session left in this series and we hope to see you there. That link to booking onto that series will be in the email. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining.